on the doorway entering the U.S. Senate, there's a symbol, and it says one word. It says courage, and I think I think courage right now is the scarcest value in politics right now, and I think it's in part because people are too deep in the game. They're constantly thinking about just how to rise up the rungs, go. I think for me, the fact that I don't feel beholden to politics. I got myself into the US Senate without owing anybody in politics anything. Like, if I feel liberated, I can try to do this job how I want to do it. So that's I think what I feel grateful for.
Hi, it's Liz. Welcome to the Capital Coffee Connection podcast. And I am excited today to be speaking with U.S. Senator from the great state of New Jersey, Andy Kim. And I have known Andy for a few years now. We met through some friends here in the Korean community in Los Angeles, Jihee and Peter Hu. And I met you when you were a congressperson. So I just want to say thank you for being here. And I want to introduce you as also the first Korean American elected to the U.S. Senate, and also just being a first and how important that is something that I always like to talk about, because on this podcast, we talk about the heart and our humanity and the home of our leaders. We don't do politics and policy, but just getting to know our leaders. And I think being a first and hopefully not being a last is something that is important to focus on. So welcome, Andy, and thank you for taking time I know it's virtual, but for a cup of coffee.
Thanks so much for having me here today, Liz.
So I want to just start by also telling people that you have been a long-time public servant. Sometimes people say, oh, you're a U.S. Senator, but you really started at a place where you've really worked your way up and you've really done incredible things working with Democrats, Republicans under different leadership in the Pentagon, the State Department, National Security Council. And you also were in Afghanistan working with two generals, Petraeus and Allen. And then you ran for Congress. And I just would love to hear a little bit about what it means to be a public servant, because that is truly who you are.
Yeah, I love public service. I hope to do this for the rest of my life. But I'll be honest with you, Liz, I didn't always think about it in terms of government. My mom was a nurse. My dad was a medical researcher, tried to cure cancer and Alzheimer's. So they had a broad view of service. We were a very service-minded family, but my parents said service isn't just a job, it's a way of life. And so I very much had that sense of service driving me. But I went off to college. I was kind of on track to go into science. But then September 11th hit, and I was a sophomore in college when September 11th hit. It was devastating for our country. I'm a Jersey kid. It was brutal for our state. I remember just worried about my sister who lived in the city at that time. And that by 6 p.m. on September 11th, I told myself I'm going to work in national security for the country and try to do everything I can to stop this kind of tragedy from happening again. So everything changed. And, I never would have imagined that I'd be a U.S. Senator. I'm a son of immigrants, a public school kid, didn't grow up in a political family. But like I said, that mindset of service is everything to me. Like, as much as I consider myself, a father, a son, a brother, a husband, right up there with that is public servant. Like, it is, you cannot know me unless you understand that about me.
And I just think also, think about that. That was 14 years ago. Not 14 years ago, 22, sorry.
Yeah.
It was 23 years ago.
Yeah.
And just to think what you've accomplished and what you've done. It should be, I think, inspiration to many people who are sitting out there right now going, I feel really frustrated. Things aren't going well for me, or things aren't going well, in my opinion, for our country. What is it that I need to go and do? And you've just said is that as an inspiration. It's like, go find it out. What is your passion? And you went from science to public service. It doesn't mean you can't change. And it doesn't mean that you have to be stuck in a place where you don't feel comfortable or where you're not actually exercising your voice and your power.
Yeah, that's right. And look, there was a lot of doubts along the way. I remember when I did my very first internship with the government was at USAID. I just graduated college the day before. And I showed up in the Washington, D.C. at Union Station. And I came out and there was that beautiful view of the Capitol building.
Yeah.
It's stunning. And I was so inspired, but I was also terrified because I realized at that time, like, I didn't know anybody in the entire city. There was, like, not a single person in the entire city of DC I knew. I felt like total imposter syndrome. I felt like, who am I to think that I could serve in government? Like, I'm a nobody. I'm from a nobody family. I thought government was for somebodies with famous last names and lineage going back to the Mayflower and this and that. It was a lot, and I felt a lot of self-doubt. And there were a number of times when I thought, you know what, like, I just can't make it here. So I just want to sort of add that texture because it wasn't easy. But you're right, like, when you chart that course from September 11th to, the 10th anniversary, September 11th, I sell it, not sell, I observed that in Afghanistan. And so I was working there in Afghanistan and in Kabul. We observed the and commemorated the lives lost. And then on the 20th anniversary, I was a member of Congress at Ground Zero for the 20th anniversary representing my home state. And it helps anchor me. And this past September 11th, I actually, to your point, I actually introduced a series of bills that are designed to try to foster and encourage and reignite a spirit of service in this country. So things that would create a national service program, would encourage volunteerism, would invest in civics education in this country. And I did that particularly because it was in many ways, the anniversary of the birth of my commitment to public service.
That's beautiful, and that is bipartisan, and that is what everybody should think about in terms of us as Americans. So thank you for sharing. That's beautiful. Let's go back a moment. You were born and in Boston, but you grew up in Jersey. Your parents are immigrants. What is it like to be a child growing up in America when you were a child, like the son of immigrants? And you spoke Korean at home, you spoke English in school. What was that like? And what was the hardest part about that? And maybe some of the better lessons for people, because there are a lot of immigrants and they're also struggling with that message and that lifestyle.
Like, I knew my parents were immigrants, but when you're a kid, like, you spend 0% of your brain power thinking about what kind of lives your parents lived before you were born, And, like, I just didn't really, like, occur to me how hard their lives were. They were born during the Korean War. My dad was a polio survivor since birth, and he has a very, has had a disability, has had difficulty walking. And, like, to me as a kid, I was just like, "Oh, I wish I had a dad that could play soccer with me," and stuff. Like, I look back and I feel so ashamed of just the self-centeredness, but, look, every kid goes through that,
Exactly.
right?
Every kid has
But
their dad. Right.
and so, but I remember how, as I got older and got to understand my parents' lives more, I understand how amazing America was in giving them opportunity. Like, my parents grew up with nothing in poverty, and my mom ended up being a nurse. My dad ended up getting a PhD in genetics here in America, and, like, it's incredible. But there was also just a real sense of profound loneliness. They were the only part of their family in the United States. We found community in the church, the Korean community, and that helped. But it was still something that I know my parents struggled with. And yes, we'd speak Korean at home, but actually, when I was little, I was pretty slow in speaking at all. And when I did speak, I really struggled. So my parents were worried that it was because they were trying to teach me two languages simultaneously. So, like, those are some of the challenges that families face. And look, I also grew up in an area that didn't have really any Korean Americans. We had to drive like an hour into Philadelphia to go to a Korean American church, an hour each way. I remember every Sunday, I'm like, surely there is a church that is closer where we don't have to go so far.
Yeah.
But it meant a lot to my parents, and that sense of belonging is important because it's hard sometimes here.
It's hard. And I think that sense of belonging is where we are now. And, at this time, people are really searching for belonging. And I just say this because driving an hour is an amazing piece. You're with your family for an hour versus feeling alone and sitting in front of a screen and feeling really desperate and desolate. So I like that story because it is a reminder that, in order to seek community, sometimes you have to leave your house and it takes a little bit of work, but it is so powerful for people to feel part of being a community at this time, especially.
Yeah, but I think for me, like, going through that experience and seeing the struggles that my parents had, I think it's why I get so frustrated at times that, you know, that that it feels like, like I'll share this story, like, what, and I won't go too deep into it, but when I was at the State Department, yeah, I was working on Middle East politics and policy, but and served in Afghanistan, as you noted. When I came back from Afghanistan, I found a note on my desk and I opened it, and it was from the security department at State Department, and it said that I've now been banned from working on issues related to Korea because I'm Korean American. And, like, I was just, like, so humiliated, like, "Why are you holding my heritage against me?" Like, I'm not even working on Korea issues, I'm working on the Middle East. But it was just that sense of, like, I don't know, like, there's been this longstanding trope of perpetual foreignness, and I feel it sometimes in micro ways, like, when I go and, like, I now got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. When I go to the playground, I remember there was this one time where someone just came up to me and they're like, "Wow, you kids speak really great English." I'm like, "Yes." Like, we're American. Yeah,
Born and
we're
raised.
American. So, like, I don't know, it's just, like, I just say that just because, like, what my parents struggled with, what a lot of families struggle with that are immigrants, is that sense of belonging. And it's hard sometimes because, like, I still kind of wonder, like, I'm a United States senator, but I still have these experiences. Like, when will I feel like I belong? When will others feel like I belong? But that's some of the challenges of living in the most, diverse and heterogeneous community. But that motto of "E pluribus unum," it's not easy. It's
Nope.
it's it's not easy.
It's not easy, and thank you for sharing that story. It really touches me because I understand from speaking with so many and having immigrant the grandparents and knowing their struggles again many years ago, but understanding it is not easy to fit in and to feel like you are welcome. But I hope that your kids will grow up and that will change and they will, not have to experience some of the things that you're experiencing because we are a diverse. That is the beauty of America, our diversity.
Yeah, I mean, look, I will say that, like, right now, like, my kids and all their friends, they, like, know all the words and dance to, like, this movie K-pop Demon Hunters, and, like,
Yeah.
being Korean is cool now, and, like,
Yeah,
Korean barbecue and
exactly.
K-pop and BTS and Korean dramas and stuff like that. It's very different than, like, when I would get teased for bringing Korean food to lunch. So, like, there's that aspect of it. But just regardless, yeah, like, my kids are getting further away from, our heritage of our ancestral homeland. And, it's interesting. How do I try to pass along that heritage without feeling like it's just becoming generationally diluted? How do you keep it meaningful? And I'm still, as a dad, trying to think about, how to be able to do that. But
Yeah.
a lot of people have that.
Exactly. And I have a question now, going back to your kids, your wife, your life, you're in Jersey, you're in DC. How do you balance it? Because I am sure there's things you miss, but there's also incredible importance for you to spend time with your wife and your sons. And how does she deal with it? Because that gives her an extra amount of work with you being gone a lot.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, I got sworn into Congress with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I was commuting up and down from New Jersey almost every day. It was pretty brutal, but I did it because I really wanted to make sure my wife could tell and knew that I was committed first and foremost to being a dad, and that I wasn't going to lose myself, down in DC at the Capitol. But it wasn't easy, and actually, I'll be honest with you, like, I can't do everything that other members of Congress do. Like, there are lots of events at night, different groups and advocacy groups, unions do different, you know, meet and greets and galas and this and that. And there are lots of fundraising trips and other things. And then there are lots of congressional delegations to different countries. And I haven't done a lot of that stuff, which, like, look, like, after having done some of it, like, a lot of it probably isn't necessary, right? But there was, like, part of me that was just like, man, like, am I missing a lot of this job? Like, am I really, doing enough? Can I dedicate enough as a young dad of young kids to this job. And I really it was during the pandemic actually, when my kids were still little and childcare got shut down and my family, we were impacted by that. Then I realized that actually, you know what? Like, it's important to have the voices of young parents and young dads in Congress.
Yes.
I just, doubled the number of millennials in the US Senate on the Democrat side. Like, that's a good thing that we have different voices in the mix and that I can talk about the challenges of kids and mental health. I can talk about the anxieties of parents. Not, I can't talk about it in the full total. I can't speak on behalf of everybody, but I can give a personal message about that, of being part of the sandwich generation, of having these little kids growing up while I have aging parents, in particular my father, whose health is declining rapidly. Like, people can connect with that, right? And
That's the whole podcast, making our leaders real. And you are real when you struggle and you or make it look like it's perfect or look like
yeah,
it's easy because it isn't
yeah.
easy.
Yeah, I had this, one 4th of July parade I was in. I was walking along, I had my kids with me, and this guy kinda yells out, he's like, "Hey, Andy Kim," and I looked at him, "Yeah," I'm like, "Yeah, what's going on?" And he's just like, "Thanks for being normal." And I was like I just, like, keeled over laughing because 'cause I'm like, that's probably, like, the best compliment that someone in politics can get these days. Um,
Exactly.
but but yeah, like, look, my kids, they anchor me, being able to go back, to my family and spend and like, just kinda reminds me why I do this. I do this because, my parents fought for me and to give me a better life, and came to America. Like, I'm gonna fight for my kids and try to give them the kinda lives that they deserve, and just kind of remembering that, like, I'm doing this because 'cause I'm a dad, that's worried about what kind of America my kids are growing up in. And I think that keeps me, like I say, that's my North Star, keeps me in the right direction.
It's important and very special. And thank you. I'm just going to go back because I ask all the leaders if they had a teacher, someone when they were young that really saw them as what they could potentially be and believed in them. And, some people have said that they came to their swearing in, and many have said they've kept in contact. Do you have one of those teachers that you can remember that looked at you and said, Andy, I'm going to hold you to a higher, maybe degree to like do the best you can for yourself?
I would probably say that it's my cello teacher. The cello teacher is in many ways was the first teacher I ever had, now that I think back on it, because I actually started at a crazy young age. I started cello at around 4 or 5 years old. They couldn't even find a cello small enough for me. It was essentially just kind of like a violin with an end pin, and they couldn't find, like, a chair that was really small, and this teacher had never taught anyone as young as me, but I was, like, really interested in this instrument. I had heard, Yo-Yo Ma play, and I was just like, "Whatever instrument that is, I wanna do that." And so, just the patience of a child, but, like, it wasn't just about learning the cello, which has, been my love. I told you I was slow in speaking, so my parents often say that my first language is music because I knew my scales before I knew my ABCs. It was something that gave me discipline, it gave me confidence, and this teacher, just, like, taught me how to focus on what I can control. And honestly, like, I remember it was also just such a this teacher would constantly, have me do, like, recitals and concerts. It, like, helped me gain that confidence of being in public, performing, being up on stage. And also, like, I remember it was, like, somewhere I was, like, around, like, 9 or 10 years old, and I was getting really good at cello, and I just, like, remember, like, feeling like, I'm like, "You know what? Like, I'm a kid, but I'm better at this thing than 99.9% of all adults in the world." Like, it helped me feel a sense of, like, look, if I put my mind to something and try it, like, I can do something extraordinary, and that felt really good, and I really liked that feeling, and it was my teacher that really helped me because you can imagine keeping a 5, 6, 7-year-old focused on something like that. I was practicing hours a day at, like, 7 years old. It's crazy to think back on it. So I appreciated that teacher, I mean, like, was with me, for most of my childhood. It wasn't just like 1 year or 2 years, like really saw me grow up.
And what is the
Uh,
teacher's name?
his name's David.
David. Wow,
So,
beautiful story.
but, yeah, no longer with us, but I hope he was proud of me.
I believe he was. What's the best advice you've received? Maybe the worst advice you've received? And the advice you give people, and I always talk about it from like the perspective of giving young people. I know you talked about your growing up and staying in the fight and working hard and believing, but kind of just advice because I think people right now are looking for leaders and real ones, real people, but people that can offer them some thoughts to carry in their lives.
Like, no one gave this advice to me, like, as explicitly, but they did in spirit, but I kinda turned it into a saying, which is, like, don't self-select yourself out of anything. Like, when like I said, like, I'm a son of immigrants, a public school kid, like, who would've thought that I could be eligible to go to this school or get this scholarship or do this thing? And I have those doubts. A lot of people have doubts, especially people who are thoughtful and humble and empathetic. They often have those thoughts. People who are egotistical, narcissistic, power hungry, they don't have those thoughts as much. But that's the point. Like, I think it's so important that we try for things that we care about. And like, I know people and I've talked to people and I feel it myself sometimes. You're just like, you know what? Like, I don't think I'm good enough for that job. Like, it's going to take, more experience to do it. So I'm just not going to apply. I know a lot of people that go through that. And I myself feel it sometimes. But no, like, look, like, try for it if you care. Like, I didn't think I was someone that could win the Rhodes Scholarship. But I was just like, I'll try. I ended up getting it and transformed my life. And, I ran for Congress at the age of, 34 when people told me, there's no way. I guess that kind of is actually the worst advice I got, the advice I got at 34. I had people say, look, they literally told me when I was thinking about running for Congress, they're like, look, you seem like a nice kid and all. But there's no way you can win this seat, that you're throwing away, your career. You're getting yourself in a mix where you're gonna humiliate yourself. So don't run. Like, they were like, "Look, this district voted for Trump. It voted for this Republican congressman by 20 points. It's an, you know, 85% white district, less than 3% Asian American. They're like, it's not gonna vote for someone that looks like you." I'm glad that I didn't listen to them. I'm glad I'm glad, but, like, it was just that same thing, like, I was so upset. I was like, I don't like someone trying to tell me what I can or cannot do simply because of the color of my skin and my last name, and so it just made me more determined to say, "Hey, look, like, it's up to the voters then." Again, I'm not gonna self-select myself out of this thing.
Right.
Same thing happened when I ran for Senate, people saying, "You're throwing away your career. No way you can take on the powers that be in New Jersey." But again, I was like, "Look, let the voters decide." I'm not gonna self-select myself out of this. And so, I think that was probably the best kind of advice I could pass along. The other thing I'll just say to young people is try to get a mentor, try to find someone that can really help you think through your life. And it's never like a formal thing. Like, I've had like 3 people in my life that I would consider mentors to me. I never like at any point was like, "Hey, will you be a mentor to me?" Like, it was just a relationship, you know?
Yeah.
And it's been so meaningful to me, and I try to pass that forward. Treat people as you wanna be treated, right? So I try to do my best to help others, but those would be some of the best things that I could pass along to others.
Yeah, and I'll just add that you were one of the youngest people to be in Congress, and you were one of the youngest people to be a senator, a U.S. senator. So even with everything that you've just said, you just have made it like actually possible for other people to imagine themselves in those positions. So that's
Yeah, like, I'm as you pointed out, I'm first Korean American ever in the Senate. I'll be honest with you, like, I didn't actually set out to break that barrier. I was the only Korean American in the House when I won. I didn't actually realize there weren't any other Korean Americans in the House when I first started running. But, like, so it wasn't like I was, like, setting out to break the barrier, but, like, I do have to say, like, I feel good that, like, my kids can grow up in an era where, like, people don't have to like question whether or not a Korean American can do these types of jobs. Because when I was at State Department, I certainly didn't see many people that looked like me. And that led to some of the imposter syndrome that I was reflecting upon. And I liked it. I had I had like this one young Korean American woman. It was in college. She came up to me after I won my House seat, and she's like, "I just want to say, like, after you won your congressional seat, my parents are like." No longer saying I only have to be a doctor or lawyer. They're like, you could go into politics and foreign policy like Congressman Kim. And I was like, oh, that's like really sweet of you to tell me that.
Amazing. Amazing. And there's many others that were just didn't get to tell you that, but that's beautiful. So now we're going to switch to rapid questions, get to know
Okay,
Andy, fun
sure.
ones that, one word or a sentence, whatever, but just little people to get to know who you are. First, what is your favorite sound
My kid's laughing.
and your favorite color?
I like a dark, kinda like cobalt blue.
What is your favorite scent or smell?
I love, like, a campfire smell, like campfire and, like, barbecue, like, that kinda smokiness I really love.
It's
Yeah.
nice.
I don't like it on my clothes the next day, but I like it
In the moment.
in the moment.
Okay. I haven't heard that one before, but I appreciate that one. What is your favorite word? If you had to pick a word.
I I'm not really sure what my favorite word I guess it would be probably something like explore, something like that, like something that's just about pushing yourself, right?
That's a nice one. And explore is a beautiful one because it doesn't
Yeah.
mean you know the answers. It just means you have to go and try.
Yeah, like, when I wanted to go into science, I actually wanted to go into, like, astronomy and, you know, work, about outer space. That didn't happen, but then I became a diplomat and explored, in a different way.
Yeah. Who is your biggest cheerleader?
My biggest cheerleader, I would say, like, my wife and I are just totally in sync.
I love
Actually, like, we're just a few days away from me having met her 20 years ago. So it's like I'm about to enter a point soon where I have spent more of my life with her than my life without her. But yeah, we're more in love than we've ever been. She's my biggest cheerleader. We're right there for each other.
oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. If you had one meal and that was the only meal you could, choose, what would it be?
Yeah. I I would say it's like I'm guessing it would be Korean barbecue. Again, grilled on an open fire is key. That or I'm always game for a good plate of sushi. So it'd be like one of those two things.
And I read somewhere, you can correct me, but did you ever want to, like, if you were going to have a restaurant, open a bagel restaurant?
Yeah.
That's true.
So 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 I I ended up, like, leaving the White House to be a dad, and I was a full-time dad, and while I was a dad, I just started making stuff at home, like baking because I'm at home with this kid all the time. I had, when I was in college, been a cook. So I did a lot of baking, bread making, and that's when I made bagels because I was out in California. I didn't find, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but at the time, I did not find a good bagel on that side of the country. So I just started making my own. So I started making my own bagels in large mass when I was a new dad. And I was actually putting together like a plan, a business model to start a bagel store. But then I decided to run for Congress. so,
I think
so
that's amazing. From bagel store to Congress, like we've never
yeah,
seen that, and for a Korean American leader to do that, that's like beautiful.
yeah. But I still make bagels a
Okay, well,
lot. So
I'm going to
I'll
get a
have to
bagel
share
from
some
you
with
one
you.
day. You owe me a
Yeah,
bagel, okay?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That sounds good.
This one somebody asked me on another podcast, but I love this question. What is your favorite TV show? Like, if you needed a day, it could be an old one or a new one, that you had a day. You do not have a day, Andy, to do binge watching. But if you did, what would your TV show be?
Oh, that's a good one. I would say, like, the TV shows that I can kinda, like, rewatch constantly are, like, shows like 30 Rock or Veep.
Mhm.
I grew up like a West Wing fan. That's probably why I still have this, like, romantic optimism about politics, even though it feels like such a bygone era. But yeah, I don't know. I'd probably say something like those comedies. They're you know, I when people ask me is my job more like West Wing, Veep, or House of Cards? I'm like, oh, it's so clearly like Veep. Like it's just like it's sadly a lot more craziness and just sheer bizarre incompetence that sometimes I encounter. So it's a good kind of like other dimension realm.
Yeah. And what is Andy Kim's superpower?
Yeah, so someone asked me this about me, and what I said that I think I'll say it again here, that, like and I'll say this in a more of a professional sense, like with the job that I work. I think my superpower is that, like, I don't actually like politics. Like, I don't actually like politics as it is. Like, I don't like I didn't grow up I didn't grow up, like, in a political family. I didn't grow up with, like, this sense of, like, partisanship and campaign mode. I was a national security guy, worked under both parties. The reason why I say that is because I think it's what allowed me to ignore the advice that I got, that I was too young to run for Congress, that I was not strong enough to be able to win the US Senate seat. My willingness to defy Jersey politics, to do what others knew was the right thing to do, but they never pushed for it because it was their world and they were afraid about the consequences. There's on the doorway entering the U.S. Senate, there's a symbol, and it says one word. It says courage, and I think I think courage right now is the scarcest value in politics right now, and I think it's in part because people are too deep in the game. They're constantly thinking about just how to rise up the rungs, go. I think for me, the fact that like I don't feel beholden to politics. I got myself into the U.S. Senate without owing anybody in politics anything. Like, if I feel liberated, I can try to do this job how I want to do it. So that's I think what I feel grateful for. I'm not somebody who's like the savviest natural speaker that could speak comfortably in front of thousands of people. I'm not somebody that's like the sharpest legislative mind and understands the nuances of the Senate, but I'm somebody that I think can operate without the kind of influence and pressure affecting me from different interest groups and the media and my own ambitions. And I feel blessed about that.
And that is truly what we should be focusing on, which is having authentic leaders that aren't influenced, but are actually authentically there for the American people, people in Jersey that you are there to represent, but all Americans. And it's a beautiful thought. And I appreciate that because it is honest. It's not, I'm here because people got me here. It's really, I'm here because my heart is huge and I want to make a difference.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. My last question kind of is tails on that one, which is the question of joy. What is joy to you? What brings Andy joy? And how do you share your joy?
My joy I think like this kind of, my favorite word was explore. I think this runner up would be curiosity. I have an insatiable curiosity. I love learning and exploring. My greatest joy is when I'm traveling with my wife in particular. The two of us make just such great travel partners. We traveled so much together, and we hope to be able to do that again at some point in our lives, especially when our kids get a little older. But yeah, there's no joy greater than being on just an amazing hike with her, and we're just out there or exploring some city that's just remarkable. And so that's my happy place. I just like that's why like I feel so blessed to have the job that I do, where I get to meet so many people I wouldn't have otherwise had the chance to meet. I've gone all across my state. I get to meet these business owners of these businesses that I've been driving by ever since I was a kid, and actually get to meet them. I'm learning more pound for pound every day than I did in university because I'm learning about all these different issues, healthcare, education. immigration, climate, energy. It's amazing, So like, that's what brings me joy.
Wow. It's a lot. And I love it because it's personal and also professional, what you've just shared with us. So I just want to say thank you. And struck me when you told me about arriving in DC at the train station and thinking imposter syndrome, what am I doing here? I don't know anyone.
Yeah.
And I imagine like when your parents got here, they sort of landed in America and felt that same thing, which is, wait a minute, we know we're supposed to be here, but we don't know people. We don't understand it. But then your father went on to get a PhD. Your mother went on to have a career, and they raised children who are a son who is a U.S. senator. And I just think that's like a beautiful place to end, because it really talks about the hope of our country, the hope of people. And you spoke about the word courage when you walk into the Senate. And in order to have hope, you have to have courage. So I hope that people listening to you will find their courage and find their special place and do what is for them important, because that is the hope of our country.
Yeah.
It's not left, right, big city, small city, where you come from, what your religion is, but it is the courage to go out and do something that is hopeful for all of us. And you, Andy Kim, have done that. And I say thank you for sharing your heart and your humanity with us today.
Thank you. I'm trying my best. Thanks so much. And I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Thank you. Hi, it's Liz. Thanks for hanging out with us on the Capital Coffee Connection podcast. Do yourself a favor. Turn off the doom scroll. Shut down the noise. And remember, there's still a lot of good stuff out there. People are kind and joy is real. Don't miss it. Share this episode with somebody who could use a reminder. Have a beautiful week. And don't forget to subscribe to the Capital Coffee Connection podcast right now. Ciao.